Good morning and welcome to Math 0465, and this is section 03. Now, there are 27 slides in this particular section, and it is covering integers. Now, those are the positive and negative numbers that you've worked with, hopefully in a prior math class. But we are now going to do some review. And we're going to talk about adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. And then we're going to get to some story problems, which I know that you enjoy doing. Now, a couple of things about our particular textbook is vocabulary. And when you go into Pearson My Math Lab and try to do some of your homework, you are going to find that they are going to use certain vocabulary words that you are going to need to be familiar with. And that is what they call the two parts of a real number. Now, every number other than 0 has a sign. And it has two parts that you need to consider. The sign is either going to be a positive or a negative sign. Now, positive numbers don't always have signs. It's understood that they're positive, but in some cases, because we may ask you for a signed number, you are going to need to provide the positive or the negative sign. And in my example, -5, the sign is negative, the size is 5. And when we talk about positive and negative numbers, we have to think about number lines. And you are going to see that I have two number lines in front of you. One that goes right and left, and one that goes up and down. Both of these number lines are going to be utilized through your homework and through the rest of this course. And before I forget, there is another vocabulary word that you're going to need to know. It is called size. The number 5 is an informal way about talking about the size of something. So you have the sign, which can be positive or negative, and you have the size. The size is how far the number is from 0. So when they talk about size or distance, that's the number. Now, a couple of things we need to talk about because you're going to be working with number lines. And some of you may be taking courses after this one, so I need to talk about vocabulary called balanced number line. Now, to have a balanced number line, we've got to have arrows at both ends. That makes it a number line. And we have to have 0 in the middle. Now, to be balanced, you're going to notice that I happen to have, in this case, 10 tick marks to the right, and I have 10 tick marks to the left. Same number, tick marks to the right and left. So a balanced number line has the same number of tick marks on both sides of 0. Now, when you do some of your Pearson homework, they may not always have a balanced number line. But in the project you may do for me, you are going to have to provide a balanced number line. And be aware that you have to have the same numbers to the right as to the left of 0. And remember, a number is larger if it's further to the right on this number line, and it's further to the right, which means if I go right, the numbers over here on the right-hand side of the number line are bigger. If I go to the left, they get smaller. Okay. Now, what you're going to be seeing is you are going to be asked to plot these particular points on a number line. And just like your homework, they're going to ask you to graph -2. Now, from the orientation, they gave you a method on how to use the graphing tool. Now, when they ask you to graph -2, you are placing a dot at -2. You are placing a dot on the second number line at -8. Now, notice that 5 does not have a sign, so therefore 5 has to be positive. Now, the graphing tool is one that you're going to need in Pearson. Hopefully, everyone will understand from the orientation how to use the tool, but in case you do, just let me know and I will send you a video to help you. Now, in this case, we are also going to be asked, without the number line, which number is further to the left or is larger than another. Further to the left is meaning which one is larger. And if you think of the number line, 2 is the number furthest to the left. Oop, take that back. I gotta read. Furthest to the left is another way of saying smaller. Well, in this case, our smaller number is -5. And our smaller number is -10. Further to the left means which number is smaller. Okay. Now, I put some notes here on the page, and hopefully you will be able to read them. Now, we are going to also have story problem situations that you are going to need to be aware of. And that is ways of expressing integers, positive and negative numbers, when given a situation. Now, on a budget sheet, which we will be seeing for the future, you will see negative quantities in red or in parentheses. If you use Excel or Google Sheets, you're going to find that negative numbers are in red or they are in parentheses. Positive numbers are written in black. Now, when we describe altitudes, we have two ways of describing altitudes. We could talk above sea level, which means we have a positive number. We can also talk about below sea level. This is a negative number. Now, in some cases, the negative may be implied. Now, that means you have to type the words below sea level. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Okay. Now, our next slide says the following situations contain negative numbers used in real life situations. Now they're asking us to interpret them, which means we are using words. Now this is saying 30 degrees 30 degrees Fahrenheit below 0. That negative sign is the words that are implied. The implied part, that negative, is the words below 0. Now, this one has a symbol that many of you have known. It's a positive or negative sign. Now, when you look at your answer choices, you are going to have to interpret what that positive and negative 3% means. So when we interpret it, we are saying that the poll reports that between 44% and 50% of Americans would vote for the incumbent for president. That plus or minus is interpreted by using the word between. And if I add 3 to 47, that's where I get the 50. If I subtract 3, I get 44. So to interpret it, I have to use the word between, and I have to actually do the adding and the subtracting of 3% from 44%. Okay. Now, a phrase that you're going to need to get used to is called the opposite of. Okay, the opposite of is a specific phrase that you are going to see. Okay, now the opposite of a number, it's probably easier to show you in symbols. Okay, I have an example here of a negative 5. I also have negative 5. Okay, these are the symbols that you are going to see when you are asked to interpret these two examples that I gave you. The phrase the opposite of comes into play. Now, the first one is saying the opposite of a positive 5. Notice that the phrase the opposite of is dealing with this negative sign. Okay? Down in the bottom, you interpret this as the opposite of negative 5. Okay? This sign right here is the opposite of. That's what it means verbally. Now, what's inside of the parentheses, positive 5 and negative 5, is written. Okay? So if you are asked the opposite of positive 5, the answer is going to be a negative 5. So the answer is negative 5. This is my answer. Now down here, the opposite of negative 5 is going to be a positive 5. So the phrase the opposite of is representing a negative sign. And some of you may say, well, why don't they just say -5 instead of the opposite of? Well, this is algebra language, and math is a language. So you are going to be learning to read and write the language of math. So notice this has a parentheses. Now we're going to change this a little bit. We are going to go from parentheses to bars. Now, these bars, one in front and one back, represent absolute value. Okay, that's what the symbols are saying. Now, we refer to the size, okay, of the number as its absolute value. That means, okay, we are looking for a number that has a distance from 0. So if you see the phrase distance from 0, that is how absolute value is thought of. Okay, so absolute value is asking you the distance. Well, if you think about the word distance, can you ever measure anything negatively? Can I measure you as a -5 feet? No. The absolute value is saying if I take my ruler and I measure from head to toe, and I measure from toe to your head, opposite directions, I am going to get a positive measure on my ruler or tape measure or whatever I use. So the absolute value has bars. And the absolute value of -5, and notice we are using the words instead of the symbol. The absolute value of -5. That phrase is saying around -5 I have bars. The absolute value of -5 is 5. The reason is -5 is 5 units from 0. This is the distance. -5 is from 0 because 5 is 5 units from 0. So the absolute value of -5, and notice we're now going to take these words and put symbols around it, is written with the 2 bars and -5 is inside. Now, I can also have, in this case, a -5 is still 5 distance from 5. So I could also write absolute value of a +5. Now this 5 is right here. It is 5 units from 0. Huh? Now, you've been introduced to some vocabulary, the words the opposite of, and the word absolute value. Now, I have 2 slides where we're going to do a couple of problems, just like you're going to see for homework. It says, state the opposite and the absolute value of 12. Okay, now, just to get you in the swing of things, what is the opposite Now the word of is understood here. The opposite of 12, because notice 12 is our number. This is going to equal a negative 12, because this 12 in our given problem is positive. Now remember, what is the absolute value? That is saying symbol-wise, we're putting 12 inside 2 bars. The distance the number inside the bars is to 0 is 12. Okay. So notice these two answers are not the same, because the opposite of a positive is a negative. And remember, the phrasing, the opposite of, means that symbol. That's why our answer is negative 12. The absolute value is saying that this number, the number inside 12, is what distance from 0? Distance is always a positive number. So therefore, this is saying, what is the absolute value of 12? Well, you want to ask yourself, 12 is what distance from 0? It's a positive number. It's 12. Now, let's try another one. Now this time, notice what I have here. I have the same question, but I've changed this to a negative number. Now, the phrase, the opposite, now the word of is implied here, because remember, in English, sometimes we don't always give you everything you need. It's understood. Well, the phrase, the opposite of, is that negative sign, parentheses, in front of a negative 18. Well, this opposite of is that symbol. The opposite of what's in the parentheses is going to give us a positive number of 18. The absolute value, well, that means I have bars and I'm putting negative 18 inside. This negative 18, you are asking yourself, negative 18 is what distance from 0? That's what you were asking yourself. Negative 18 is what distance from 0? And we are going to have, in this case, a positive number. Now notice on this slide, both numbers are positive. The symbols are the ones that are making both numbers the same and how we read them. Now, hopefully, you will have a very easy time with this. It's understanding symbols, reading a language. And this next slide is going to show you even more. It says, read and simplify. Well, first off, when we look at the very first problem, this is saying negative parentheses negative 6. Okay, to write the phrase in words, we begin the opposite of negative 6 is positive 6. Now, do I need to write a sign with that 6? No. This phrase, the opposite of, represents that negative sign. What's inside the parentheses is negative 6. And notice the word simplify. Simplify is saying, what does it equal? It equals 6. This is the phrase. This is how we read the symbols above. Now, down in the bottom, notice that I have bars. Okay, there are bars here. Right here. Right here. Okay, how do I read this? Well, I begin with the opposite of the absolute value of negative 6 is, now the answer is negative 6. Now I want to show you why. Okay. The phrase, the opposite of, is representing that negative sign in front. That's this side. Now, the phrase, the absolute value of negative 6, is the bars with the 6 inside. Now, if we look at this very simply, and this is what you've got to think, we are saying the opposite of, now, the absolute value of negative 6 is a positive 6. That's what absolute value means. And then we're taking this symbol and saying the opposite of a positive 6 is a negative 6. Okay? So a negative absolute value is a negative number. This little negative is representing this negative from the phrase the opposite of. The absolute value, this green thing, is a positive 6. We're asking the opposite of a positive 6 is a negative 6. Okay. Now, hopefully you see that I got this little negative sign here. Okay. Now, this is a language game. Some of you may know it without realizing that you know the language by symbols, but you don't know how to read and interpret and write what you're seeing mathematically. That's what this course is going to teach you, to read the symbols. Now, hopefully you all can get these. Now, I'm going to give you a practice. It says find the value. Well, I don't have to do much more than find the value. 24 has bars, which means I'm talking about the absolute value, which means this answer is going to be a negative 24. I have the opposite of the absolute value. The opposite of an absolute value is going to be a negative because the absolute value will always be positive. Now, if I look at B, it's different than A because I have parentheses. This symbol is saying take the opposite of a negative 12. Well, this will give me a positive 12. The opposite of a negative 12. Now notice A had bars, B has parentheses. I interpret the symbols differently. Now C, 5 has parentheses in C, but it has no sign, so I know that this must be a positive 5 in front of the parentheses, which means I have a negative 5 as a value. Now this one is a little different. You actually have to do what's inside the bars. 15 minus 8 is 7, and they're bars. The absolute value of 7 is the positive 7. Okay. Now, hopefully, if you have any questions, you can always let me know via email, and I'm more than willing to explain it to you. Now, we're going to talk about some story problems, and they all deal with language and situations. These situations are going to define whether the number is positive or whether the number is negative. Now, this says solve each of the following problems by drawing a number line and writing the calculations. Now, drawing this number line may be part of the instructions. Sometimes they're going to give you a number line. Sometimes there's no number line. They're just going to ask you to write the calculations. But seeing this is easier to understand why we're going to get what we get. Now, in this case, you have to remember that temperature is always read in a number line that goes up and down. Now, reading the symbols, it is 34 degrees below 0. Now, on our number line, that means that down here is where negative 34 is. That's where we're at. It is 34 degrees below 0. But the temperature will increase 12 degrees. Now, increase means you're going up 12 degrees. That means we're going up 12 degrees. Now, what will be the temperature at the end of the day? Well, they are giving you a negative 34 plus 12. This is how they want you to write the calculations. We're starting at negative 34. And because they're using a picture, we haven't really talked about adding and subtracting integers, but it's implied here. And as you know, this will give me a negative 22 degrees. Now that's my answer. Now, I need to let you know that this negative 22 can be interpreted. To interpret your answer, you would say it is 22 degrees below 0. We are interpreting our answer. To interpret our answer, which is right here, it is 22 degrees below 0. This negative is the symbol for math that says below 0. Okay. Now, The next story problem, you're going to have to be a little aware of history. Okay. Now, this is a number line, and something you have to realize about ancient history. Okay. We have a point in time that will be 0. But to the left, this side is known as the BC side, or in ancient civilizations, this is before Christ. Anything to the left of 0 was before Christ. Now, anything that is to the right of 0. Now, some of you may not know that this is called AD. This is a timeline. This means after the death of Christ. Okay. AD. So in this problem, if you don't know about AD and BC, you're going to have a little trouble figuring this out, because this is bringing in what we call writing across the curriculum. We're using a timeline that comes from history and answering it based upon history and math. Well, in this case, if a civilization began in 100 BC, okay, that's right here. This is 100 BC, okay, and lasted 450 years. That means we go this way, 450 years. Notice we're crossing the 0 mark, and we're ending in the AD time period. Well, the calculation is written based upon BC and AD. This 100 is a negative 100. Before Christ is negative. Now, it lasted 450 years, means I'm adding 450 to a negative 100. So my equation looks like this. And this place where I stop in the AD time period is going to be 350. Okay. And this is AD. Okay. Now, stock market time. Okay, everybody knows the stock market is going up and down. Now, it said the stock market already lost, okay, already lost 12 degrees or 12 points for the day. But in the next hour, it drops 43 points. Now, notice it's saying total loss. Okay. This, if you want to use this number line, basically we are starting with a loss of 12. But then we're losing, again, 43 points. The calculation is negative 12 minus 43, or a negative 55. This is the math. But the total loss, we have to interpret. the stock market lost 55 points on this day. Okay. That's how I interpret it. I have a loss of 55 points. Okay. Now, just to make sure you understand and remember positive and negative numbers, here's what your book is going to tell you. When you add two numbers with the same sign, now they're saying add the sizes, which means add the numbers, and keep the same sign. Well, 55 and 18 are both positive. So when I add them together, I am going to get 76. Now it's positive. Do I have to write the positive sign? No. If I have two negatives, now notice they're the same sign. This will give me a negative 76. I'm still adding the numbers. I'm going to get there. Now, what happens if I have different signs? Just like here, I have a negative and I have a positive. Well, this is where you have to understand that in math, when signs are opposite, we are subtracting, which means I take 58 and I take 18 and I subtract them, and that will give me 40. But I keep the sign of the number with the larger size. That means my answer is negative 40. Now this one, I have a positive 58. This is understood. No sign means this is positive. But this is a negative 18. I'm still subtracting. This will give me 40. But the difference in this example is my answer is a positive 40 because 58 is bigger. Now, in this slide, again, language, the operation of subtraction. Now, you are going to see A minus B, just like I have here, A minus B. They are going to ask you to rewrite it. And that's where our lovely phrases are going to come in. Okay. We are going to rewrite negative 5 minus 15. Now, I know that some of you may already know the answer to this, but it's the understanding that you rewrite this because we're using the rules of adding sign numbers. This is saying a negative 5 plus a negative 10. This symbol that I put right here between the 5 and the parentheses is saying I'm adding. And as we know, negative 5 and negative 10 is going to give me a negative 15. Okay. Now, we also have this one. Now, notice here that we have the double negative right here. See the double negative? Okay. Right here. Now, the double negative is saying that I want to take negative 5 and then I want to take the opposite of the negative 10. which means I want the opposite of -10, which is a +10. This symbol is saying take the opposite of what's in parentheses. That's a -10. This will give me a +5. Now, notice these two slides, the last one and this one. They are asking you to rewrite it using addition. Okay? The rules of signs to add and subtract fall under one heading, the rules to add integers. Okay. Now, this slide, hopefully you know that this is a -22 plus a -30, which will give us a -52. This means -22 plus a -30. Now the rules say subtract, but because they're two side numbers, we're adding. If we take a -7 and the opposite of a -11, notice what that means. That's symbols. This will give me a +4. 11 is bigger than 7, and the signs are different. Now, just to brush off the cobwebs when you multiply, if two signs are the same, whether they be two positive or two negative, you are going to have a positive answer. And as you will see, 3 plus 6 is a +18. But when I do a -3 and a -6, I still get a +18. When I do 35 divided by 7, they're both positive, my answer's 5. Again, -35 divided by a -7 is still going to give me a +5. Nothing's changed, okay? And when I have multiplying or dividing, that's the catch. What am I doing? And they're different signs. The results will be negative. Now, I threw this one in right here. -64 and -16 are the same sign, which means I'm going to get a positive answer. Same sign. This is the column that has different signs. -64 divided by 16 is going to give me a -4. 81 and 3 are positive. This will give me 27 positive. This will give me 27 negative. Okay. Now, story problems. Okay. Let's interpret. Francine already owes Jamie $20. That phrase, owes $20, means that Jamie is $20 in the hole. She asks to borrow. Okay, when you borrow, you are still taking money away from Francis. This will give me a -30. Now, what will she owe him? Okay, and it should say how much. Okay, I love my slides. This should be much. Will she owe them? She will owe $30. This is my answer in words. This is my answer in symbols. Okay. Now, my last slide. Okay, this has 4 parts to it, and I need to make sure you understand the parts. It says write a generalized computation to represent the situation and interpret your answer. Now, if it is 30 degrees in the morning, but rises to 52 degrees by noon, okay, what change in temperature? Now, this phrase, what change, is telling you to subtract. This phrase means subtract, which means we are taking the ending temperature and subtracting the starting temperature, which means we are taking a positive 52 and subtracting a positive 30, or 52 minus 30 equals 22 degrees. So the result is 22 degrees. Subtracting, that's what this phrase means. There is a 22 degrees rise because we have a positive number here. We have a 22 degrees rise in temperature. Now, if you have trouble with this one, because there is similar on your homework, make sure that you check it out. And this last slide is basically some reminders. The rules for sign numbers allow you sometimes to predict a sign. Yep. And sometimes the sign of a number depends on the size of the number. Remember, if the signs are different when we add or subtract, that size tells me the answer sign. Now, hopefully, this helps you with the first section. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me, and I will